This podcast serves Middle Tennessee every weekday morning, and it's made possible by member support. Learn how you can make a difference at WPLN.org/support.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's August 19th, 2025. On this day in 1785, the board of what would become known as the University of Nashville met for the first time. Almost as soon as the settlement that would become Nashville was established, its leaders began thinking of setting up some kind of educational institution. Before Tennessee was organized as its own state, they successfully petitioned the North Carolina legislature to pass an act for the promotion of learning in Davidson County. The school was known first as Davidson Academy. The Presbyterian minister Thomas Craighead opened the school in his church building called the Spring Hill Meeting House, which was 6 miles east of Nashville, where Madison is now. By the standards of the day, it was far from the center of town, but that's because it drew students from all over the circuit that Craighead served as minister, which included places like Gallatin and Goodlettsville, as well as Nashville. The greater area where initial settlements called stations were established at the very start of organized European settlement in the mid-state. It pretty quickly became clear that Nashville was the community on track to become a city. And over time, the school both grew bigger and moved into the heart of Nashville. If you're familiar with the Metro office complex just south of downtown, the Richard Fulton campus with the old Howard School building and the Nashville Children's Theater, that was the University of Nashville campus. In the early 19th century, the school became intrinsically important to this city's efforts to level up and provide locals with a window to the broader world. When that school became a university, it was the first within a 200-mile radius. I mean, at the time, there weren't any universities yet in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, or otherwise in Middle or West Tennessee. Now, most of the university closed in 1850 due to a funding crisis, and specific academic programs did reopen, but they closed down during the Civil War and later reopened again. But for the most part, those remnants of the university just kind of limped along before being absorbed into other programs like Vanderbilt's medical school. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. The University of Nashville needed the okay from a state government to open, and the city government had some say about its physical plant. But the actual running of the school seems to have been quite independent. And generally speaking, that's still supposed to be the normal way of things at universities in this country. Certain standards need to be met, and accreditation agencies check to make sure that they are. But the government has mostly stayed out of the day-to-day running of things, or the nitty-gritty of higher ed curriculum. Until lately, that is. You can't go far online these days without running into headlines about things like the battles between Harvard and the White House. But honestly, that's just a trend that was already happening in places like Tennessee, a trend that's just now blowing up to a larger scale. In 2021, when critical race theory was the big bone of contention, the state legislature passed a law limiting what kinds of lessons K-12 schools can teach about so-called divisive concepts. And as many norms as that law violated, it wasn't entirely wading into new water. The state does have quite a bit of say-so about curriculum in those levels of public schools. But the next year, the legislature passed a similar law aimed at higher education. It created a process for students at Tennessee's public universities to complain if their professors waded into lessons that they considered too woke. There was a similar order of operations with laws limiting the ability of trans students to participate in athletics. Those bills were passed on the same timeline for K-12 schools in 2021 than in higher education the following year. And those were followed up by more laws clarifying and deepening the concepts and chipping away at developments from the last few decades that so many students and faculty had considered improvements. The legislature created protections for controversial guest speakers and placed tighter limits on the ability of public colleges and universities to diversify the demographic groups or viewpoints represented on their campuses. And now, of course, President Trump's executive orders are taking a broad swipe at anything and everything that could be considered DEI. We've seen universities across the state, public and private alike, end campus programs and scholarship programs that could be perceived as furthering diversity or equity. Some seem like it may just be a matter of changing the names of things while continuing in the same spirit, but some forms of support for non-white students are just gone. Last week, the University of Tennessee announced it's hiring a high-powered, nationally recognized law firm to help them out. Not with pushing back against the White House, like some schools are doing, but to pore over the university's standards and practices to make sure it's in total compliance with Trump's executive orders. The move is unlikely to change what has already happened for UT. The school's already seen more than $38 million in federal research funding frozen or altered. The school is under investigation, as are so many other universities, for allegations of anti-Semitic harassment, which almost certainly means free speech demonstrations on campus in opposition to the attacks on Gaza. The school's international students' visas were revoked, causing a panic. And although some have been restored, for many, their trust that they can safely study in this nation was shattered. Now, I could make this list of points about most schools of higher ed in this state right now. UT is just the one that's in the news at the moment for hiring those lawyers. Every university is scrambling to figure out where they stand, what they are and aren't allowed to do, what's affected, and just what changes they need to make to come into compliance with White House demands. And I would say that they're trying to figure out where they can push back and take a stand, but honestly, there doesn't seem to be much energy for that these days in Tennessee. Everyone's just too exhausted, and most likely, too scared. In just a few minutes, we hear from the man who shows up to every state execution in support of the death penalty. That's coming up after the newscast.
Nashville Public Radio is always here to keep you informed, whether it's the latest news or music you should check out. Every week, What Where Wednesdays shares the latest happenings taking place right here in Nashville by talking to members of our community, putting on events in your neighborhood and beyond. So tune in to What Were Wednesdays every Wednesday, and you can always find events at WNXP.org/events.
Here's the latest from WPLN News.
The Boring Company has started digging in Nashville, but there haven't been any environmental reviews of the project, and that's raised some concerns locally. 2 years ago, an investigation by OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, found that employees of the Boring Company were exposed to potentially serious injuries or even death in Las Vegas. The company was fined $112,000. WPLN's Caroline Eggers told Here and Now that state environmental regulators also documented the company dumping untreated water into storm drains in Las Vegas, which is the only city where the company operates a tunnel.
Some people are worried about the company's track record for safety, especially since the Nashville project won't have the oversight considered typical for projects of this scale.
Eggers has also reported that sinkholes are a risk with the project in Nashville, given this city's geology. The Metro Action Commission has named its new director. Jamaica Bees will lead the commission, which seeks to break the cycle of poverty. The commission connects families in needs with things like childcare services and utility and meal assistance. Bees comes to Nashville from Alabama, where she's been a service provider and led various nonprofits. She'll begin her new role at the end of September. Pinnacle Financial Partners is set to become the largest bank in Tennessee if its merger with Georgia-based Synovus goes through. Pinnacle would surpass Memphis-based First Tennessee with more than $100 billion in Tennessee assets. The Nashville Business Journal reports Pinnacle's new size would also come with heavier regulatory oversight and stress testing requirements. Pinnacle's been Nashville's largest bank since 2018, with roughly 20% market share in the city. This summer has been a scorcher in Middle Tennessee, and today the temperature could hit triple digits. WPLN health reporter Catherine Sweeney tells us this level of heat can be dangerous, especially for those taking certain kinds of prescriptions.
Bodies are generally pretty good about keeping a steady internal temperature. They depend on the brain to gauge the heat and then tell the body what to do, how much to sweat, to let the face get flushed to expel some warmth. But drugs that affect the brain's messaging systems, or neurotransmitters, can interrupt. Think antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications.
And so it can make heat exhaustion or heat stroke even a little bit more likely.
That's Dr. Marshall Hall, who works in the emergency room at TriStar Skyline. With temperatures this high, heat exhaustion is possible for anyone. But he said people who are at higher risk, like those who take these medications or have heart or kidney conditions, should keep an even closer watch for early warning signs.
You end up, you almost pass out if you start to have any type of confusion at all, if you ever stop sweating, if you're not producing the same amount of urine.
He also noted that illicit substances and alcohol hamper the body's ability to cool itself, driving up the risk for heat stroke. Catherine Sweeney, WPLN News.
Lipscomb University is breaking records to start off the new school year. The private university had its largest student enrollment on day one, 4,825 students, officially the largest in the school's history. Lipscomb also set another record with the largest class of freshmen for the third year in a row. The university is also experiencing a high retention rate and an increase in enrollment among graduate students. Candace McQueen is the university president. She credits the high enrollment to Lipscomb's mission of focusing on Christianity as well as having elite scholars. Lipscomb is ranked number 3 among Christian colleges in the nation by Niche.com, which is known for its school rankings. Money magazine also named the university one of 2025's best colleges. High school student athletes in Tennessee are switching to new schools like never before. This follows a TSSAA rule change in the spring that loosened transfer rules. Prep athletes still aren't allowed to change schools solely for athletic reasons. The high-profile athletes have been moving often. The agency says it's counted double the transfers as last fall. The Times Free Press reports competitive programs with a track record of securing college scholarships for student athletes are benefiting. One coach tells the newspaper that the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. The newest baby animal at the Nashville Zoo is already on the prowl. Gemma is a clouded leopard who was born 4 weeks ago and weighs 6 pounds. The Tennessean describes her as being about the size of a jar of Nutella. She's expected to grow to between 30 and 35 pounds and will be capable of taking down a wild boar. So far, she's content to take in a bottle of milk and enjoys snuggling with her lamb stuffed animal. Next door to her is a couple of leopard cubs, Joker and Quinn, named after DC comic characters. They arrived last month from a zoo in Kansas, and they're together in hopes of mating to increase the number of these endangered leopards. This is part of the zoo's goal of being a leader in leopard habitation. Zoo officials say they have the most clouded leopards of any animal institute in the country, and they've spiffed up the space for breeding.
You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org.
With few exceptions, in the past 16 years, every time there's an execution in Tennessee, community members against and for the punishment gather outside of Riverbend Maximum Security Institution to wait and to demonstrate. Without exception, the vast majority oppose the death penalty. Sometimes there's only one man in the pro-death penalty area. This is Nashville's managing editor Tasha A.F. Lemley spent time with him recently as the state executed Byron Black.
The first time I saw Rick Lottie was outside Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in 2019. He was there in the for side during Donnie Johnson's execution. In contrast to the maybe 4 dozen or more vigil attendees in the against side, Lottie was by himself. But even in a crowd, he'd be hard to miss. Lottie is tall. He wears jeans, a long mustache, cowboy boots, a trench coat in cold weather, and in any time of year, a cowboy hat with a rattlesnake wrapped around it with fangs dripping venom. Across the fences and fields, separating the fors and againsts, the only thing I heard him say after Johnson's execution was when he yelled, "Thank you, Governor Lee." And at Byron Black's execution just this Tuesday morning, his thoughts are biting.
Today we're going to wipe the smile off of Byron Black's face. You know, he's a disgrace. He's going to get what he deserves.
This execution, Lottie is actually not alone remembering Black's victims, Angela Clay, and her young daughters, LaTonya and Lakeisha. He shares the large grassy space with 4 women who didn't want to talk on record, but expressed some relief at the day. One woman lowers her head and says with a hushed voice, "God's will is done, it's over." End of a chapter.
End of a chapter.
Victims' family members, like these women, are some of the reasons Lottie has stood his own vigil at the prison for about 10 executions since 2009.
The victim's family and their friends. I come here for them.
He's particularly angry about crimes involving children, and he tells me there's a big reason for that.
I was almost murdered in Madison, Tennessee on Christmas Eve of 1971 by my stepmother. She found out that our father had moved in with his secretary and he wasn't coming back for anybody. So she decided to give him a Christmas present he would never forget. She pulled out his Colt 45 revolver, pointed it at me, pulled the trigger, and it went click. She kept pulling the trigger.
Lottie says his stepmother left the room to try and load the gun, and she failed.
So I know what these two little girls went through. I know what it's like to have a gun pointed at you when you're a child and see the trigger get pulled.
In the past, he's dressed up as a priest to mock the actual clergy holding vigil on the other side. And for Billy Eirich's execution in 2018, he dragged a speaker out to his side of the field to blast AC/DC's Hell's Bells at the protesters. Still, leaving this execution, he meets and shakes hands with a couple clergy and is still talking with one pastor long after nearly everyone else has left. Guards even give them a kind 15-minute warning. Issues around the death penalty are complex and deeply emotional. And even though Lottie always stands on the pro-death penalty side of the fence, he tells me he has many major concerns about the punishment. Acknowledging a flawed system, saying innocent people have at least occasionally been executed, and even questioning whether it's a sentence that should ever be handed down again.
Just because somebody is anti-death penalty and pro-death penalty doesn't mean that we can't sit down and be civil to each other and see if we can't figure out a solution to this. Because it's not fair to that family standing behind you. They had to wait 36 years for justice to be served.
For This is Nashville and WPLN News, I'm Tasha A.F. Lemley.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. And thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.